So the PyeongChang Winter Olympics ended a few days ago with a lavish closing ceremony. I saw the closing ceremony. Unfortunately, I missed the opening ceremony, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was artistic and creative, and I always enjoy these things. I think they are interesting sort of platform for a country's culture, and in a world with so many problems, it is something different. It's nice. Um, but inevitably, because of the political context going on around us, other things have been taking the headlines. Specifically, some of the implications of potential Korean unification. Although that's only being speculated on, it's by no means a sort of developing story, so to speak, as something that is likely to happen. It's pure speculation. Apparently, after the games, President Moon of South Korea met with Kim Jong-un's sister to discuss the beginning of this process. Now, I don't know if that's formal or if it's just rumors, but that's been reported. Um, what is known is that Kim Yong-chol, who's a North Korean general, was in attendance at the games. He stood for the South Korean national anthem, but there were protests in Seoul and in other cities. In fact, I should say outside the Olympic Stadium itself in PyeongChang County, 200 anti-Pyongyang protesters waved South Korean and US flags, banged drums, and held signs saying "Killer Kim Jong-chol, go to hell." Now, what this is a reference to is that Kim Yong-chol was the general in charge of an incident in 2010 when some 46 South Korean sailors died when the warship Chonam was hit by a North Korean missile, and four civilians also died on an island. That was one of the most serious incidents since the main hostilities of the Korean War ended in 1953. I say main hostilities because the Korean War never actually came to a formal end. The vast bulk of the fighting and the 3 million people who died, approximately, the figures are between 2.5 and 3.5 million people died from 1950 to 53, but there has been a number of flare-ups since then, and this was one of the most serious such incidents. Um, Now, notwithstanding the fact that's a relatively small group of protesters for a country of 50 million, 200 isn't a huge demonstration. There is real anger in the south, at the north, but also directed at President Moon. Um, and I think they see him as being a sellout. The President Moon has always been on the left of Korean politics, South Korean politics, from what I understand, and he has long argued for diplomacy with the North rather than a hardline approach. So the question is President Moon Korean Neville Chamberlain, or is he a visionary statesman who is seeing the bigger picture and doing the best for his country? Um, I don't know. I don't know. Um, no doubt the North used the games. I speculated on that early on. There's no doubt about it. The North used these games as a political kind of stunt. There is a woman who is a former cheerleader. Now, I don't know whether she's defected in these games, probably not. But she spoke, or she was quoted on the BBC as saying they were there. The mentality they had is that they were in enemy territory and they were there to promote the youth ideology. Um, those cheerleaders became a major aesthetic point of the North Korean delegation. Now, it's subsequently been reported by a dissident, Lee So-yom, who's a 42-year-old former military musician who fled to South Korea in 2008. Now, bear in mind, this is 10 years ago, but he said at that time at least, dancers and singers were forced to strip and provide sexual services at parties held every day for the country's Central Politburo. And apparently, North Korea's art troupe, he told Bloomberg, came here and performed with fancy dances and songs, but not only did they have to be in charge of Kim Jong Un's propaganda, they also have to go to parties and provide sexual services. Um, That's 10 years ago, and whether that applies to the young women involved this time or not, I don't know. But I wouldn't put anything past the Kim regime with the amount of testimonies that have come forward from defectors, and by the sheer nature of it being the most secret regime in the world. Um, this question of unification, I think it's highly unlikely. They may just say that from the outset. I just don't think it's going to happen anytime soon because there are real major questions around that. Um, the most obvious historic comparison is German reunification in 1991, but 1990, the Cold War ended the following year. But the political circumstances of that time were quite a contrast. Whereas the East Asian theatre today is the tensions are rising, at that time you had the opposite situation where the Cold War was thawing. You had a reformist in Mikhail Gorbachev, the wall came down. So, whilst there were certainly concerns, not least from Britain, about a unified Germany, um, I think it was a very different geopolitical situation. There is some parallels. I mean, East Germans, when they first went into the West, were overwhelmed by the relative wealth, by the freedoms, and so on. And certainly you would get that in such a case of Korean unification. But I think even more so in the Korean example, because as bad as East Germany was, very few regimes come close to North Korea in terms of the absolute secrecy. Also, in the case of East Germany, it was, in a sense, a substitute regime of the Soviet Union, whereas North Korea is kind of a lot unto itself. True, it still gets supplies from China, but I don't think it's quite the same situation as East Germany answering to Moscow versus North Korea answering to Beijing. I don't think that's exactly the situation. I do think Beijing can do more than it's saying. Since the sanctions came in, there has been Chinese vessels photographed still delivering shipments into the north. So take from that what you will. But definitely China would fear a unified Korea because it wouldn't be a unified Korea under the Yuch regime. It would be a unified Korea under South Korean capitalism and relative democracy. South Korea is not a perfect democracy, but it is a democracy compared to the North, and it's like another world. Now, culturally and ethnically, there is no difference between the two Koreas, except politically, the difference is obviously stark. Um, that's why very often we hear about Korean music, Korean this, Korean that. I think it's because South Koreans sometimes are reluctant to talk about Korean partition. From their point of view, the North has been hijacked by a communist regime, um, and that's valid. That's a valid point of criticism. I think the prospect of a unified Korea is very interesting, but I can't see China being comfortable with that happening, and certainly the Kim regime wouldn't, let it happen. Apparently, Kim Yong-chol has said that the North wants talks, the North wants a summit with the South, and is even open to talks with the US. I think any sign of diplomacy at all should be welcomed, but I think that South Koreans who are skeptical, that's understandable. I think it's understandable that Washington is skeptical and Tokyo. Um, Not that I think Trump particularly helps matters with some of his rhetoric, but it's a very cynical point of view, but I don't think that anyone can honestly look at the past 2 weeks and think it's anything other than a propaganda stunt by the North. I mean, North Koreans weren't even allowed to watch the games, except probably selected citizens in Pyongyang. Um, and now it's being reported that the young women, like I say, uh, who were cheerleaders, this defector claims that they may well have been sex slaves. I wouldn't put anything past the North. So time will tell. But unfortunately, I see things escalating more than fine in this situation.